Why was everyone so sure she would stay silent? The captain's question cut through the cavernous hangar sharp as a blade. Any combat pilots here? His tone was steady, his eyes searching, the weight of command heavy in his voice. For a moment no one moved. The silence thickened, pressing down on the recruits until it almost hurt. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few nearly laughed under their breath as if the question itself was absurd. A combat pilot here, among them, impossible. And yet from the back of the formation, one figure stirred. She rose slowly, quietly, as if gravity itself resisted her decision. A young woman, late 20s, with boots worn by long marches and a uniform edged by the faint fray of service. Her movement broke the stillness like glass shattering, every pair of eyes turning toward her. Some widened in disbelief. Others narrowed with smug, silent judgment. The captain's gaze snapped to her. "You." Her reply was calm. "Yes, sir." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Name: United States Air Force combat pilot, F-16, 2 tour overseas, call sign Raven. The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. For a moment the room seemed to lose its balance. Whispers rippled through the ranks, disbelieving. She's lying. She has to be. A combat pilot, a woman. But the captain didn't smirk. He didn't dismiss her. He studied her, silent, measuring. And then slowly he gave a single nod. "Step forward." Her boots struck the concrete floor in a rhythm that carried years of discipline. She stopped at the front, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. There was no arrogance in her stance, only quiet certainty. Yet in that certainty lived something else, something none of them could see. Memories she carried like invisible scars. The captain circled her, his presence deliberate, almost predatory. "You say you've flown combat." "Yes, sir." "You've looked the enemy in the eyes." "Yes, sir." "And fired when it mattered." The pause lingered. A flicker passed across her face, not weakness but memory. Skis lit with tracer fire. A cockpit rattling under the hammer of anti-aircraft rounds. Voices on the radio, some alive one moment, gone the next. Her throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Yes, sir, I have." The captain stopped. His eyes studied her as if searching for cracks in her armor. What he found wasn't bravado. It was something rarer, an authenticity forged in fire. He let the silence breathe before speaking again. "Then prove it, not with words, with action." The recruits shifted uneasily. They thought this was a lecture, a test of discipline. But now the atmosphere shifted. The air thickened with suspense. The exercise began. It wasn't a routine drill anymore. It was a battlefield simulation. Ground-to-air coordination, a scenario where one wrong call meant catastrophic failure. Precision and trust decided everything. Normally, recruits would watch, learn, maybe stumble through in small groups. But with Raven stepping forward, the captain changed the rules. He gave her the helm. She stood at the map table, shoulders squared, voice steady. The chatter in the room died as she called commands with clarity honed from real combat. "Bravo team, advance. Delta, hold position. Fire mission grid coordinates locked. Strike in 3, 2, 1. The monitors lit up. The ground units moved with sharp precision. Air support synchronized perfectly. Targets neutralized with clinical efficiency. What unfolded was flawless. Not theory, not luck, experience. The recruits who doubted her stared, their disbelief bleeding into silence. She hadn't boasted. She hadn't tried to prove them wrong. She had simply done what she knew, and the result left no room for mockery. The captain said nothing for a long moment. His eyes stayed on her, unreadable, as if considering not just her skill but the weight behind it. Then he turned to the others. "You all smirked when she stood up," he said quietly. His voice wasn't angry. It was heavier than that, like a verdict. "You thought strength was loud, that it swaggered, that it looked like arrogance and muscle, but strength can be quiet. It can walk in with nothing but steady eyes and a past that speaks louder than words." The recruits lowered their gazes. Some clenched their fists. Others simply swallowed hard, their earlier smirks turning to shame. The captain turned back to her. For the first time, something faint touched his expression, the edge of a smile. "You're not just a pilot, you're a warrior, and these men and women would do well to learn from you." Her chest rose, but she didn't allow pride to surface, because inside her something else churned. She hadn't stepped forward to impress anyone. She had stepped forward because she couldn't stay seated, not when she carried the ghost she carried. That night in the barracks, whispers filled the dim room. "Did you see how she ran that op? She didn't miss a call, she's the real deal." Their tone was different now, respectful, cautious, some even admiring. But Raven sat quietly, polishing her boots, her hands steady, her face calm. Behind her eyes, though, memories stirred. A desert sky burning orange over the horizon. A wingman's last words cut short mid-transmission. A mission debrief where silence hung heavier than any report. She didn't rise to prove herself. She rose because the captain's question wasn't just about now. It was about then. It was about the comrades she had lost, the skis that haunted her dreams, the battles where she made it home but others didn't. And sometimes, the only way to honor the fallen is to refuse silence. Days passed, doubt turned slowly into respect. Recruits began asking her questions. How do you stay calm under fire? How do you breathe when fear tightens your chest? How do you keep moving when your hands shake? She never answered with lectures. She showed them, quietly, steadily, through action. She told them the truth they rarely heard. That fear doesn't vanish, it sits beside you. That courage isn't about killing fear but walking forward with it. That strength isn't loud, it's steady, and steady saves lives. The captain watched from a distance. He saw the shift in the room, the way recruits leaned toward her words, the way she carried herself without needing to dominate. And he knew then, leadership didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it looked like Raven. On the final night of that training phase, he gathered them again. His voice carried across the hangar. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward her, "has done what most of you will never understand. She has carried lives on her shoulders, knowing that one mistake could cost them all. She has flown into skis filled with fire and still returned. Remember this, when you judge someone by the surface, you're blind to the battles they've already fought." The room was still, silent. The words sank in, deeper than any order or punishment could. And Raven, she didn't bask in it, she didn't smile. She simply stood steady as ever, because she didn't need their validation. She knew who she was, a pilot, a survivor, a warrior who carried her scars not as weapons but as quiet truths. Later, as lights dimmed and the hangar fell quiet, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The captain's question replayed in her head. Any combat pilots here? She thought of the men she had flown with, the ones who never came back. She thought of her call sign, Raven, and why it mattered. Ravens weren't doves. They weren't symbols of peace. They were creatures that thrived in harsh places, survivors where others perished. And maybe that was what she had become. But even in the quiet of her bunk, doubt still lingered. Because the truth was, no matter how strong she looked, she still carried the weight of choices no one else in that room would ever fully understand. And though she had risen today, tomorrow would bring its own silence, its own question. Not from the captain, from herself. Was she still strong enough to keep standing? Why did she still hear their voices at night? The barracks had gone quiet. Outside, the night hummed with the low buzz of generators and the distant sound of boots against concrete. But inside Raven's head there was no silence. Only echoes, the clipped transmission of her wingman's voice. The static, the sudden, sickening cutoff. She closed her eyes, but it played again, the same way it had for years. "Raven, I've got your 6." And then nothing. Her hand tightened on the edge of the thin blanket. She forced a breath, steady, measured, the way she had practiced, but it didn't push the memory away. It never did. She had been 24 the first time she saw tracer fire cutting through a night sky. The desert stretched endlessly below, a canvas of shadow broken only by flashes of gunfire. Her F-16 shuddered under her hands, the controls alive, the air itself resisting her presence. Every fiber of her body wanted to turn away, but orders were orders, and worse, people's lives depended on her precision. Her squadron was small that night, 4 jets in the air, 2 would not return. She could still feel it. The rattle of her cockpit, the sting of sweat running into her eyes, the way her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through her flight suit. The radio chatter filled her ears, each call sign crisp until voices turned to static. "Raven, stay tight, watch your altitude." She had answered steady, because she always sounded steady. That was what they counted on. But then came the scream of anti-aircraft fire tearing up from the ground. Lines of light shooting past her canopy, some so close she swore she could feel their heat. She rolled, banked, dove, every muscle locked with tension. And then she heard it. Her wingman's voice, quick, sharp, not fear, warning. Hit, Raven, I'm gone." A streak of fire across the desert. A soundless explosion where a plane had been. Her chest tightened as though it were her own oxygen being ripped away. She had flown on, she had finished the mission, because that's what training demanded, because failure meant lives lost on the ground. But even as her missiles found their targets, her eyes burned, not from the smoke, from knowing she was still flying and he was. Now, years later, lying in the quiet of a training barracks, her body remembered everything. The trembling in her legs when she landed that night. The way her commander had looked at her in silence, no words needed. The way she had sat alone, helmet on her knees, trying to steady her breath long after the engines died. The recruits here thought strength was skill, that it was about execution, about flawless commands during a simulation. They didn't know the truth. Strength wasn't born from success. It was born from loss, from walking back to a base with one fewer jet, one fewer comrade, and still strapping in the next day to fly again. She sat up in her bunk, boots hitting the floor softly. The barracks smelled faintly of polish and dust. Across the room, some of the younger recruits were still whispering. Their words carried respect now, but they didn't know her. Not really. They saw precision. They saw calm. They didn't see the weight she carried in silence. She walked quietly to her locker, opening it just enough to pull out the folded photograph taped to the inside. 3 pilots, side by side, grinning under a desert sun. Her in the middle. 2 men at her sides. One was gone. The other she hadn't seen in years. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb, eyes lingering on the smile of the man whose last words had been for her. That was why she stood up when the captain asked. Because silence felt like betrayal. Because his voice, cut off mid-sentence, still demanded that she not let herself disappear into the background. The next morning came cold and sharp. The recruits lined up again, eyes heavy from long hours but tension humming through them like wires strung too tight. The captain's voice carried, deliberate. Another drill. Another test. But as Raven stood at attention, her mind pulled her back again. Not to the hangar, but to the cockpit, to the suffocating pressure of choices that carried lives. She remembered a different mission. A city sprawling below, lights flickering even under the threat of war. Her target coordinates burned on her display. But the radar didn't show the family she saw through her canopy in the last second. The flicker of headlights on a dirt road, too close, far too close to the impact zone. Her finger hovered over the release. Orders screamed in her headset. But in that moment, the desert wasn't a target grid. It was a place where someone was trying to live. Her heart slammed against her chest. Every instinct said obey. Every moral beat in her blood said wait. She held her fire. Seconds stretched, shouts in her ear, her commander demanding answers. And then the family's car was gone, swallowed by the dark. She released. The explosion lit the night sky. Mission complete. When she landed, she was pulled into a briefing room, the heat of the desert still clinging to her flight suit. Her superior's face was like stone. Why did you delay? Her jaw clenched. She could have lied, said it was mechanical, said her systems glitched, but she didn't. There were civilians in the strike zone. The silence stretched. He said nothing, just stared at her until she felt the weight of military law press against her chest. Finally, he leaned back, exhaling like he was letting go of a truth he couldn't admit out loud. Don't let it happen again. But she knew, he knew. The truth was simple. She had chosen humanity over orders, and she would carry that decision forever. Now, standing in the hangar years later, Raven's eyes scanned the faces of recruits who had never heard tracer fire, never felt the air itself trying to kill them. She wondered, would they ever understand that war wasn't just steel and fire? That sometimes the hardest battles weren't against enemies, but against yourself. Her gaze flicked to the captain. He was watching her again, as if he sensed the weight she carried, as if he knew she wasn't just another soldier. She was someone who had walked a line few could survive, the line between duty and conscience. And though he said nothing, she could almost hear his question unspoken. How many ghosts are you carrying, Raven? She turned away, steady as always, because some answers didn't belong in words. That night as the recruits slept, Raven lay awake again. The photo was still tucked in her locker, but her mind replayed not the smiles, not the laughter, but the moment of silence on the radio. The split second where a voice became memory. Her heart ached, not just with grief, but with the question that never left her. Did she deserve to have survived? She pressed her palms together, elbows on her knees, whispering into the dark, not as a soldier, not as a pilot, but as a woman who had lived through what others hadn't. Forgive me. No one heard, no one ever did. But perhaps in that silence, in that fragile confession to the ghosts who lingered, was the truth of why she kept rising. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because the dead deserved to be remembered through the living. And because courage, real courage, wasn't in the missions completed, it was in standing up when the silence dared you to stay seated. Why were they all watching her now? It had been 3 days since the simulation that silenced the smirks. 3 days since the captain had called her out in front of everyone, forcing her to stand or stay invisible. She had chosen to stand, and now every hallway, every drill, every hushed break in the mess hall carried new weight. Eyes lingered on her, not with mockery anymore, but with a mix of curiosity and caution. Respect was there, yes, but so was unease. They wanted something from her. During weapons drills, a younger recruit asked, "How do you keep your hands steady when everything's chaos?" His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed, like a child asking his mother how not to cry. Raven looked at him for a long moment before answering, "You don't." He frowned, confused. She continued, her voice even. "Your hands shake, your heart pounds. Fear doesn't leave, it fights you. You just learn to keep moving with it." The recruit nodded, still unsure, but something in her tone lodged itself inside him. Not bravado, not theory, truth. Later, during a field exercise, another asked, "Did you ever freeze? Lock up." Raven didn't hesitate. "Yes." The honesty startled him. He had expected denial, a lecture on discipline. Instead, she admitted it so simply that he didn't know how to respond. She leaned closer, her eyes steady. "The question isn't if you freeze. The question is, what do you do after? Do you stay frozen or do you move?" That answer spread like wildfire among the recruits. They began repeating it in whispers, move after fear, move after freeze. And without meaning to, Raven had given them something no manual ever had, a way to understand their humanity without being ashamed of it. The captain noticed. He watched from the edges of every drill, his face unreadable. He never interrupted her, never corrected her, never dismissed her words. He only observed, as though waiting for something to surface. That night, after the barracks had gone dim, Raven sat on her bunk cleaning her rifle. The simple, methodical motions kept her thoughts from wandering too far. But across the room, she caught sight of two recruits whispering, pointing toward her when they thought she wasn't looking. She ignored them at first, but then one of them, emboldened, called across softly, "Hey, Raven, what's it like, killing someone?" The room went still. Raven's hands froze over the weapon. The question wasn't asked with cruelty, but with a morbid curiosity born from youth. Still, the words pierced deeper than they knew. She looked up, eyes locking on the recruit. "You don't forget it," she said. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was sharp enough to cut the air. The recruit's face shifted, discomfort settling in. "You see their face in your head," she added softly. "Sometimes for years, sometimes forever. Don't ever treat it like it's a story to brag about." No one spoke after that. The silence carried her words heavier than any order could. But as Raven lay down later, the question dug into her like a blade. She had given the recruits truth, but what about her own truth? The faces never left her. They stayed night after night. Some enemies, some shadows in her dreams, and one, a comrade whose voice had vanished mid-sentence. The next day, the captain pushed them harder. A new drill, urban combat simulation. Teams tasked with navigating a maze of mock buildings, threats hidden inside, civilians scattered in the crossfire. Chaos by design. And Raven, she was given command. Again. At first, her voice was steady, movements precise. She directed squads through alleys, coordinated cover fire, adjusted formations as though she could see the entire board from above. It was second nature. But then came the moment. A recruit barely 20, eyes wide with adrenaline, froze behind a wall. He couldn't move. Gunfire thundered in the simulation speakers, shouts echoing around him. He stayed crouched, paralyzed. Raven saw him. Her throat tightened. Because in that frozen body she saw herself, years ago, finger hovering over a release switch while headlights flickered below. She saw hesitation, fear, humanity. Her instinct was to bark an order, to force him forward, but something inside her whispered louder. She crouched beside him, eyes level with his. Her voice dropped low, almost intimate. "I know what this feels like." His breathing was ragged, his hands shook. "You think if you move, you'll die," she said softly. "But staying here won't save you either. You don't have to kill fear, you just have to take one step with it." His eyes flicked to hers, searching. She gave a single nod. He moved, one step, then another, until he was running again, his weapon steady, his fear carried but not denied. The simulation ended in victory, but Raven didn't celebrate. She walked away quietly, her chest tight. Because she hadn't just saved a recruit from freezing, she had relived her own paralysis, the headlights on that dirt road, the seconds stretched into eternity, the choice that still haunted her. Afterward, the captain found her alone, leaning against a concrete wall outside the hangar. The evening light cut across his face, sharpening the lines of someone who had seen too much. "You're different," he said, not as a question, as a statement. Raven didn't answer. "You don't lead like the others. You don't push them with anger. You pull them forward with something else." She glanced at him, eyes guarded. "I do what works." He studied her for a long moment, then his voice softened, rare for him. "You've carried loss, haven't you?" Her jaw tightened. "Don't bother denying it," he continued. "I've seen it in men, I've seen it break them. You wear it differently." Raven turned away, staring at the horizon. The sun was sinking, bleeding red into the sky. For a moment she wondered if he knew the truth, how many voices she still heard in the dark. "Loss doesn't break you," she murmured finally. "It just changes the weight you carry." The captain nodded slowly, as if filing her words away. Then, without another question, he walked off, leaving her alone with the sunset and the ghosts that refused to fade. That night when the barracks lights went out, Raven lay awake again. The whispers had shifted. No one doubted her anymore, but respect felt just as heavy as ridicule, because now they expected things of her. They leaned on her, and every time they did, she wondered, What if she failed again? She closed her eyes. The photo in her locker glowed in her mind. The smile of her wingman, the silence of his last words. And with that memory came the question that always followed. How many more would she fail before this was over? Why was the hangar so quiet that morning? The recruits were assembled, but there was no simulation waiting. No map boards, no dummy targets. The captain stood at the front, his face more severe than usual, eyes sharp with the kind of gravity that training didn't carry. Behind him, sealed cases and gear waited in silence. A real mission. The air thickened as realization spread. Some recruits stiffened, some swallowed hard, their breaths sharp and uneven. They had trained for weeks, but training had always ended with a whistle, a debrief, a safe return to the barracks. This time would not. The captain's voice carried through the hangar. Deployment order came in last night. We move out at 1900 hours. He paused, letting the weight settle. This is no drill. Some of you won't be coming back to the barracks after this. Silence, not one whisper. Only the sound of boots shifting, hearts pounding. Raven felt her chest tighten, not with fear, with memory. The last time she had stood in a room like this, her squadron had flown out 4 strong and returned 2. She kept her face steady, because steady was what they expected of her. The captain's eyes flicked across the room before landing on her. He held her gaze for a fraction longer than anyone else. She didn't flinch. He gave the brief: target zone, extraction point, civilian risks, unknown hostiles, every word drilled into them like nails. And then it was over. Gear up. Raven turned to her locker. Her hands moved automatically. Flight gloves, helmet, comms, rifle. She wasn't flying this time. Not in an F-16 above the clouds. This mission meant boots on the ground. It meant close quarters, streets, buildings, a different battlefield. But fear was the same everywhere. That evening the convoy rolled out. Engines low, headlights cut, dust rising in the fading light. The recruits sat shoulder to shoulder in the back, their nerves pulsing through the cramped silence. Some tapped their knees, some mouthed silent prayers. Raven sat still, her rifle across her lap, her eyes scanning but her mind somewhere else. She could hear the desert wind through the cracks in the transport, and it carried with it a memory. The scream of engines, the roar of flak fire, the sudden, hollow silence of a voice cut off mid-sentence. She blinked, forcing herself back into the present. Her hands gripped the rifle tighter. Focus. They're watching you. The convoy slowed. The captain's voice cut through the radio. 2 clicks out, move quiet, we go in on foot. Boots hit the dirt. The night was thick, moonlight brushing across jagged stone and sparse brush. Ahead, the silhouette of a village crouched against the horizon, its rooftops hunched low like sleeping beasts. Somewhere in there was their objective, a compound rumored to house hostile leaders planning strikes on Allied positions. Raven scanned the dark. Every shadow looked alive. Every movement of the wind whispered danger. The team split, moving low, rifles raised, breath held. Raven moved with them, her senses sharp. Every crunch of gravel under her boots echoed in her ears. Every heartbeat felt too loud. At the edge of the village, they halted. The captain gave hand signals. 2 squads moved left, 2 circled right. Raven was embedded with Bravo, moving down a narrow alley that smelled of dust and oil. Windows above them were dark, doors shut tight, but silence here wasn't peace, it was warning. Halfway through the alley, a sound cracked the stillness. A child's cry, soft, fragile, somewhere ahead. The recruit beside Raven stiffened, rifle jerking upward in reflex. His breath quickened. She caught his shoulder, grounding him with a steady hand, her eyes locked on his. Steady. He exhaled, lowered his weapon. They moved forward inch by inch. The cry faded into silence again, replaced by the distant hum of voices. Low, male, ahead. The compound. The captain's signal came through comms. Move in. Quiet. Raven's pulse kicked harder. She pressed her back against a wall, waiting for the breach. Her chest tightened with a memory she couldn't shake. A family's headlights flashing below her cockpit, her finger hovering, her breath breaking. Civilians, innocents. She forced the thought down. This was different. It had to be. The breach charge blew, the door splintered, shouts erupted, chaos poured into the night. The team flooded inside. Raven followed, rifle raised, scanning corners, her body moving on instinct. The air filled with the thunder of boots, the bark of commands, the clash of bodies. Shots cracked, close, too close. A recruit stumbled near her, panic flashing across his face. He had frozen again, just like in training. Raven didn't think. She grabbed his vest, yanking him into cover. "Breathe," she hissed, her eyes drilling into his. "One breath, one step, move." He blinked, steadied, and surged forward again. She turned, covering him, every movement sharp, every sense burning. And then there it was, the room at the center. A table, maps, weapons, men shouting orders in a language she didn't need to understand. The fight exploded. Flashes lit the darkness. Shouts turned to screams. Raven moved like water, her training alive in her veins, but her mind never detached. Every pull of the trigger felt heavy. Every impact carried weight. And then silence. The room was theirs. The captain's voice cut through. "Secure it fast." Raven scanned the chaos. Bodies on the ground, papers scattered, the air thick with smoke and dust, and then movement. A boy no older than 12, crawling out from under a table, eyes wide with terror. The recruits froze, rifles rose. Raven's chest locked. In an instant she saw the headlights again, the civilians she had almost killed, the choice she had made, the ghost she carried. She stepped forward, voice sharp but calm, weapons down. The recruits hesitated. The boy whimpered, hands raised, trembling. "Down," Raven repeated, not louder, steadier. Slowly the rifles lowered. The boy bolted, scrambling out into the night, swallowed by shadows. The recruits turned to her, some with confusion, some with relief. The captain watched her silently, his expression unreadable. But Raven felt the weight crash into her chest. She had made another choice, and choices always carried ghosts. The extraction was quick. The team moved out with the evidence they needed, leaving the village behind in a storm of dust and silence. The convoy rolled again, engines humming, recruits slumped in exhaustion. Raven sat still, her rifle across her knees, her thoughts heavier than any weapon. The boy's eyes burned into her. The recruit's hesitation, the captain's stare. And the question that had haunted her for years returned, louder than ever. Did she do the right thing, or had she just written another ghost into her story? She closed her eyes, the desert wind rushing past the convoy. Somewhere in the silence, she thought she heard her wingman's voice again. Not words, just presence, a reminder that the past was never gone. She opened her eyes, steady once more, because tomorrow they would look to her again, and strength, even when fractured, had to appear whole. Why didn't anyone speak during the ride back? The convoy rolled through the night, engines steady, tires grinding dust, but not a word passed between the recruits. The mission had been successful, intelligence gathered, hostiles neutralized, the team extracted without a casualty. On paper, it was flawless. In reality, every soldier in the back of the transport sat heavy with something unspoken. Raven kept her eyes forward, the desert rushing past through narrow slits in the vehicle wall. Her rifle lay across her lap, her hands steady on the steel. But inside she wasn't steady. Not at all. She saw his face again. Not the enemy, the boy, the flash of terror in his eyes. The moment rifles rose, fingers twitching near triggers. 1 second, one choice. If she hadn't stepped in, his small body would be lying on the floor of that room with the rest. Her jaw tightened. She told herself she did the right thing. She knew she did. But war never gave easy answers. That boy might grow into a man who hated everything she stood for. He might pick up a weapon one day. He might become another ghost. And yet, If she had let him die tonight, she would already hear his voice in her dreams. The recruit beside her shifted uncomfortably, breaking the silence with a muttered breath. Never seen eyes like that before. Raven turned her head slightly. Whose? The kids. His voice was quiet, strained, scared like he thought we were monsters. Raven didn't reply. She didn't have to, because she had seen it before. Civilians caught in crossfire, staring at soldiers like shadows that came in the night to take everything. Sometimes they were wrong. Sometimes they were. Back at base, the debrief was short, clinical. The captain ran through the mission outcomes with precision, his tone flat, his face unreadable. He didn't mention the boy, didn't question Raven, didn't praise her either. When the room cleared, he stopped her with a glance. Stay. She froze, the others filing out until the door shut behind them. The silence stretched. Finally, the captain spoke. You had a choice back there. Raven's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, sir. You overrode instinct. You ordered rifles down. Her voice was steady. He wasn't a threat. The captain stepped closer, his gaze sharp. Not tonight, but tomorrow, a year from now, what then? Raven held his stare. We don't kill children on what-ifs. His jaw worked, tension tight in the muscles. For a long moment he said nothing, the air between them charged with two truths colliding. Then he nodded once curtly. Dismissed. She left the room, but his words followed her out into the dark. What then? In the barracks, whispers rose again. This time they weren't about her skills. They were about her judgment. You saw what she did, right? She let him go. Could have been a decoy, could have blown the whole op. Or maybe she just saved us from shooting a kid. The opinions split, sharp as blades, but none of it reached Raven's face. She sat on her bunk, removing her boots with slow, deliberate motions. The photo in her locker caught her eye again, 3 smiling faces under a desert sun. She closed the door quietly, not wanting to see it tonight. One recruit broke the silence, his voice hesitant. Ma'am, how do you know you made the right call? Raven looked up, her eyes heavy but clear. You don't. He blinked, then. You live with it, that's the truth. Her voice silenced the room, because none of them wanted to hear that the choices they would face might never feel clean. But it was the only truth she had to give. Later that night, sleep didn't come. Raven lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every second in that compound. The boy's eyes, the rifles rising, her command. And behind it all, her wingman's voice again, cutting off mid-sentence, like a wound that refused to close. She sat up, swinging her legs over the edge of the bunk, pressing her palms against her knees. The darkness pressed in, the silence thick, but her thoughts refused to rest. She whispered into the night, the words barely audible even to herself. Was it mercy or weakness? No answer came. The following days blurred into drills and routines, but the shift was clear. The recruits watched her differently now, some with respect that had deepened, others with doubt sharpened by her decision. In their eyes, she wasn't just the combat pilot anymore. She was the soldier who had made a call that could have risked them all. During marksmanship training, one of them approached her directly, a tall, sharp-eyed recruit who had never bothered to hide his skepticism. Why'd you do it? He asked bluntly. Why'd you let him go? Raven didn't stop cleaning her weapon, because he wasn't our enemy. He scoffed, you don't know that. She looked up, meeting his gaze with quiet steel, and neither do you. The recruit faltered, but his pride kept him standing stiff. Raven let the silence linger before adding softly, if you pull that trigger, you'd better know why, and you'd better carry it for the rest of your life, because it won't let go of you. Her words hit harder than any lecture, because they carried weight, the kind only lived experience gave. That night the captain visited the barracks, not to inspect, not to lecture, just to stand silently for a moment at the door, watching. His eyes found Raven again, and though he said nothing, his presence spoke volumes. He saw what she was becoming, not just a soldier among recruits, but a mirror. She reflected their fears, their doubts, their humanity back at them. And though some resisted it, others began to lean into it, drawn to the quiet strength she carried like a hidden banner. But Raven, she didn't feel like a banner. She felt like a fracture holding itself together just enough for others to lean on. As lights went out, she lay awake once more, her chest tight, her breath shallow. Her choices felt heavier with each passing day. And for the first time since she arrived, a thought she tried to bury clawed its way to the surface. What if I'm not fit for this anymore? What if the ghosts I carry aren't just scars, but cracks that will break when they need me most? The thought lingered long after the barracks fell silent. And in the darkness, Raven finally admitted it. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of failing them. Why did her hands tremble before the briefing even began? The recruits filed into the operations room, their chatter low, subdued. At the front, maps glowed under harsh fluorescent lights, the captain's finger tracing routes across hostile terrain. This mission was different. Higher stakes. No time for error. Raven sat at the table's edge, her jaw clenched. She had survived sorties where tracer fire lit the sky like lightning. She had flown into storms of steel and come out alive. But tonight, her pulse raced before a single order was given. The boy's eyes, the captain's words, what then? They still echoed inside her. The captain's voice cut through the fog. Intelligence confirms a weapons transfer. Remote village, mountainside. Target convoy expected within the next 24 hours. We intercept before it crosses into Allied territory. He paused, scanning the room. His gaze landed on Raven, longer than the rest. You'll coordinate the strike. Ground and air. Precision matters. There will be civilians nearby. The recruits glanced at her, some with trust, others with doubt. Raven gave a single nod, though inside her chest was tightening. Another choice. Another line between orders and conscience. The briefing ended. Gear was issued. Silence carried them back to their barracks. As Raven strapped her vest later, a young recruit lingered near her bunk. The same one she had pulled from paralysis during training. His voice was soft, almost fragile. "Ma'am, if it comes down to it, how do you know what's right?" Raven froze. Her fingers tightened on the strap. She could have given him an easy answer, a line about instinct, about training, but she couldn't lie. "You don't," she said quietly. "You make the call and then you live with it." The recruit swallowed hard, nodding, though the weight in his eyes deepened. Hours later, the convoy rolled again. This time into mountains sharp and jagged under a pale moon. The night air was thin, biting cold. Every bump in the dirt road rattled through their bones. Raven sat in silence, headset pressed to her ear, listening to the radio chatter. Distant, steady voices. The air team already circling above. Her responsibility was to link sky and ground, to be the thread that held chaos together. Her throat felt dry, her palms damp inside her gloves. The captain's voice crackled through. 2 clicks out, dismount. Boots hit gravel. The air was sharp with dust and pine. Raven adjusted her comms, her rifle hanging ready. The recruits spread into formation, eyes wide, nerves taut. They moved along a ridge, the valley yawning dark and silent below. And then the headlights. Dim at first, then stronger. A convoy crawling along the dirt road, trucks heavy with weapons. The captain's voice cut in, low and precise. "Wait for my signal." Raven marked coordinates. She lifted her binoculars, hands steady by force of will. She relayed numbers into her mic, her tone sharp, controlled. The air team confirmed. The strike was ready. And then movement. From the corner of her vision she caught it. A figure at the edge of the road, small, fragile, a girl, no older than 10, walking barefoot, her arms clutching a bundle of sticks. Her chest locked. The recruit beside her whispered, panicked, "There's a kid down there." Raven's breath caught. Her finger hovered near the comm switch. The order was moments away. One command and missiles would tear through the convoy and the child. Her heart pounded, her throat burned. "Raven," the captain's voice barked. "Status." She froze. The girl stopped in the road, turning toward the lights of the approaching trucks. She didn't run. She just stood there, small and still, as though frozen by the roar of engines. The recruits shifted, panic rising. "Ma'am, what do we do?" Her hands shook over the comm. Sweat ran cold down her spine. Memories slammed into her. The headlights on that desert road, the family's car, the seconds that stretched into eternity, the choice that still haunted her. Her mind screamed two truths. Strike now, save lives on the border. Hold fire, save hers. "Raven," the captain repeated sharper. "Status now." The air around her seemed to collapse. Every heartbeat thundered. Every second dragged her deeper into the same impossible question. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Then a hand touched her shoulder. The recruit she had guided through fear and training. His voice was low, steady, echoing her own words back to her. "You don't kill fear, you move with it." Her breath caught. For a moment she saw herself reflected in his eyes, not a ghost, not a fracture, but the strength she had given him. Her hand steadied, her voice cut into the calm. "Abort strike, ground intercept now." The captain didn't reply, not for a beat that stretched too long. Then, "Copy, ground intercept." Chaos exploded. The SEALs surged forward down the slope, rifles raised, boots pounding the dirt. Shouts ripped through the night. The convoy skidded, brakes screeching, men leaping from trucks with weapons raised. Gunfire cracked, sharp and deafening. Raven moved with them, her body alive with instinct. Cover fire. Angles, commands slicing through comms, every movement precise, every word sharp. Bullets tore through the air. Sparks burst off metal. The child's scream pierced through the chaos. Raven's chest burned. She pushed forward, her rifle spitting fire, her body driven by something beyond survival. She reached the girl, pulling her down, shielding her with her own body as rounds shattered dirt inches away. "Go," she shouted, dragging the child into cover. "Stay low." The firefight raged. Trucks burned, flames lighting the valley in violent orange. The recruits fought with a ferocity born of training and fear, their movements sharp under Raven's steady calls. Minutes stretched like hours, then silence. The last shots faded, the air stank of smoke and cordite. The convoy was destroyed, weapons secured, no SEALs lost. The child clung to Raven's vest, trembling, alive. The captain approached, his face shadowed by the firelight. He looked at Raven, then at the girl. His jaw tightened, eyes unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "Get her to safety." Raven nodded, her chest heaving. She led the child to the medic, her hands steady even as her heart still thundered. As the team regrouped, whispers rose. "She saved her. She risked us all. She made the call." Raven didn't answer them. She just stood, the flames flickering across her face, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She knew what they didn't, every choice carried a ghost, even this one. Later, as they rolled back in silence once again, the child asleep in the medic's arms, Raven leaned her head against the cold metal wall of the transport. Her eyes closed, her breath uneven. And she wondered, when she faced herself in the mirror tomorrow, would she see strength? Or just another fracture pretending to hold? Why did the silence in the debrief room feel heavier than gunfire? The mission was complete. The convoy destroyed, weapons secured, no casualties among the SEALs. On paper, it was everything command wanted. But the air in the concrete-walled room was thick, suffocating. The smell of dust and cordite still clung to their uniforms. The recruits sat stiff, avoiding each other's eyes, and at the front of the table the captain's gaze was locked on Raven. She didn't look away, she never did, but her chest felt tight, her pulse a slow hammer against her ribs. Command's representative, a major flown in from HQ, spoke first. His tone was sharp, precise, stripped of warmth. "You aborted a strike." Raven's voice was calm. "Yes, sir." "You altered mission protocol, without clearance." "There was a civilian in the kill zone." The major's eyes narrowed. "A child." "Yes, sir." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "And you risked the lives of this entire unit for one civilian." The words cut deep, but Raven didn't flinch. Her voice sharpened. "I risked nothing that wasn't already at risk. Ground intercept succeeded. Convoy neutralized. Mission accomplished." The major's jaw tightened. He turned to the captain. "And you allowed this?" The captain's face was stone. He didn't blink. "I trusted her judgment." The room fell silent again. The major studied them both, suspicion flickering across his features. But finally he exhaled through his nose, frustration unspoken. "Your choices set precedent, Captain, and precedent spreads. Be careful which ones you endorse." He gathered his papers, his voice cold. "This conversation isn't over." Then he left, the door shutting hard behind him. For a long moment the room was still. Only the hum of the overhead lights filled the silence. The captain finally spoke, his voice low. "Why?" Raven's throat tightened. She could have given the easy answer, civilians, rules of engagement, collateral risk. But he wasn't asking for regulations. He was asking for truth. She met his gaze, "Because I saw her face." His eyes sharpened, and I've seen too many faces I can't forget." The captain leaned forward, his elbows on the table. His voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. "Every soldier has ghosts. Every leader makes choices that follow them. But you," he stopped, studying her, searching for the cracks she kept hidden. "You carry them like anchors. One day they'll pull you under." Raven's jaw clenched. "Maybe, but until then I'll carry them, because someone has to." The words hung heavy. Neither looked away, neither broke. Finally the captain sat back, his face unreadable again. "Get some rest. Tomorrow the questions will come harder." Raven rose, saluted, and left the room. But her chest was still burning, her mind alive with the truth she hadn't spoken. It wasn't just about the girl. It was about the boy in the compound, the family on the dirt road. Her wingman's voice cut off mid-sentence. All the ghosts had stood beside her last night, and for once she had chosen to save one instead of making excuses for why she couldn't. But what would that choice cost her now? In the barracks the recruits were restless. Some looked at her with awe, others with quiet anger. The tall one, the skeptic, stood as she entered, his voice sharp. "You endangered us." The room froze. Raven stopped, turning toward him slowly. "You're alive, aren't you?" "That's not the point," he snapped. "Orders are orders. You disobeyed. You gambled our lives for a child." Her voice stayed steady, but the steel underneath was clear. "No, I refuse to kill blindly, and if you think that's weakness, then you haven't learned anything." The recruit's jaw worked, anger and shame warring in his face. He sat down, silent. Another recruit spoke softly from the corner. "She saved us too. You saw it. She kept us steady when the firefight broke." The room divided itself in silence, those who leaned toward doubt and those who leaned toward faith. Raven ignored them all. She sat on her bunk, unfastened her vest, and began cleaning her rifle with the same slow, methodical care she always did. Her face was calm, but her heart felt like glass pressed under weight. That night she didn't sleep, not a minute. The next morning the summons came. Command wanted her alone. She walked the long corridor to the briefing chamber, the walls gray and cold, the air humming with fluorescent lights. Inside, 3 officers waited at the table. The major from the night before sat at the center. His eyes held no warmth. "Sit," he ordered. Raven obeyed, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. The questioning began, every detail, every second of her decision, why she hesitated, why she aborted the strike, why she thought her judgment outweighed standing orders. Her answers were steady, but inside, Every memory pulled at her like barbed wire. "There was a civilian," she repeated. "There are always civilians," the major snapped. "War isn't clean, collateral happens, you know this." "I know," Raven said, her voice lower now. "And I know I will carry every one of those civilians with me until the day I die. But I will not add one when I have the chance to stop it." The major's jaw tightened. "You're a soldier, not a saint." Her eyes burned, but her voice didn't waver. "I'm a soldier, and that means I don't get to pretend these choices don't matter." The silence after was sharp, like the crack of a rifle. One of the other officers finally spoke, his voice quieter, more thoughtful. "Her decision didn't compromise the mission. In fact, it may have strengthened local civilian trust. It's worth noting." The major shot him a glare, but said nothing. Finally, he leaned forward, eyes narrowing at Raven. "You walk a dangerous line, Captain. One day, hesitation will cost lives. And when it does, no ghost, no memory, no child will absolve you." Raven's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him that hesitation wasn't weakness, that humanity wasn't a liability. But she didn't. She only gave a sharp nod. "Dismissed." She left the chamber, her boots striking the floor with sharp precision. Each step echoed louder in her ears than the last. Outside, she found the captain waiting, leaning against the wall, arms folded. Their eyes met. He studied her face, the cracks she tried to hide. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Would you make the same choice again?" Raven didn't hesitate. "Yes." The captain nodded once. No judgment, no praise, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. As she walked away, her chest felt heavier than it ever had, because she knew the fallout wasn't over, and because the question that haunted her at night had shifted, growing sharper, more dangerous. It wasn't "was I right?" anymore. It was "how long can I keep carrying this weight before it breaks me?" Why did the desert feel like it was holding its breath? The convoy cut across endless stretches of sand, the night sky vast and merciless above. This mission wasn't training. It wasn't intelligence gathering. It was rescue. A downed reconnaissance team trapped behind enemy lines, running out of time. Extraction or death. The recruits, no soldiers now, sat in silence, rifles ready, nerves raw. And at the front of the column, Raven walked with the captain, her presence steady despite the storm in her chest. She had survived scrutiny. She had endured command's questions. She had chosen mercy where others would have chosen speed. And now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she had anything left to give. The captain's voice broke the silence. "We move fast, precision, no second chances." He glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. "You have the call when we reach the perimeter." Raven nodded, though inside her pulse hammered. Another decision, another wait. They reached the edge of the canyon where the reconnaissance team had gone dark. Fires flickered faintly in the valley below, wreckage, burning in silence. The smell of smoke clawed up the ridge. The captain gave the signal, "Move." They descended into the valley, shadows against shadows. Raven's eyes swept every angle, every rooftop, every shifting shape in the dark. The world felt alive with threat. Gunfire erupted. Bullets screamed across the canyon, sparks flaring against stone. The recruits scattered into cover, returning fire, their shouts tangled in chaos. Raven dropped low, rifle raised, her voice cutting through the storm. "Bravo flank left, Delta suppressing fire, move, move." Her commands carried, crisp, unshaken. The recruits moved like clockwork, because they believed her voice even when fear chewed at their bones. Through the chaos she saw them. Two reconnaissance soldiers pinned behind a shattered wall, their positions collapsing. Hostiles closing in fast. Her chest locked. There wasn't time, not for careful planning, not for hesitation. She turned to the captain. Their eyes met. No words, just a silent question. "Now." He gave a single nod. Raven surged forward. Bullets sliced the air around her, the ground erupting in sparks and dust. She slid into cover near the trapped soldiers, dragging one by the vest, shoving him toward the recruit's line. The second was wounded, blood soaking his sleeve. "On your feet," Raven barked. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Her voice was steel. "Move with me." He rose, leaning on her, his weight heavy but not enough to slow her resolve. Together they staggered across open ground as fire rained down. Every step felt endless. Every breath seared her chest. Tracer rounds sliced overhead. Shouts thundered through comms. And still she pushed forward, dragging him inch by inch until Delta squad surged to cover them. The soldier collapsed into the medic's arms, alive. But the fight wasn't over. The last reconnaissance man was still unaccounted for, his signal faint on their trackers, deeper in the valley. Time was running out. The captain gave her the look again, the unspoken one, the same look from the hangar, from the compound, from the mountain ridge. "Your call." Raven's lungs burned, her muscles trembled. Every ghost she had carried screamed at her to stop, to let someone else lead, to let the weight finally crush her. But then she saw them. The recruits, the ones who had doubted her, the ones who had frozen in fear, the ones who had whispered her words to each other in the barracks. They were watching her now, waiting for her to move. She steadied her breath. "Alpha with me, Bravo cover left, Delta right, we move now." They surged forward again, cutting deeper into the canyon. The gunfire thinned but didn't vanish. Every corner carried threat. Every shadow hid danger. And then there he was, the last reconnaissance soldier, slumped against a wall, his leg twisted, his rifle empty. Hostiles closing in, their shouts echoing closer. Raven didn't think, she moved. Sliding into cover, she raised her rifle, fire sharp and precise. One by one, threats dropped. Her recruits covered her, their movements tight, disciplined. She reached the soldier, pulling him close, her voice sharp. "We've got you, stay awake." He groaned, his head lolling, but his eyes found hers. "Thought we were done." "Not tonight," she said. Together with Alpha, she dragged him back, step by agonizing step. Bullets chased them, dirt exploding at their heels. But slowly the canyon began to open. The extraction point waited ahead, the faint glow of Allied vehicles cutting through the dark. And then silence. The gunfire stopped, the shouts faded. The valley lay behind them, scarred and burning, but theirs. The rescued soldiers were loaded into transports, medics swarming over them. The recruits slumped in exhaustion, faces pale, hands trembling, but they were alive. Raven stood apart, her rifle hanging low, her chest rising and falling in deep, uneven breaths. Her hands shook now that it was over, not from fear, from the weight finally breaking through her armor. The captain approached, his face shadowed, his eyes steady. "You made the call," he said quietly. Raven looked at him, her voice rough. "And I'll carry it." He studied her for a long moment. Then for the first time his expression softened. Not a smile, something deeper, respect. "You already have," he said. The convoy rolled out, engines low against the night. The recruits leaned against each other, exhaustion etched into their young faces. Some stared at Raven with awe, others with gratitude. All of them had been changed by her. She sat quietly, her back against the steel wall of the transport. Her helmet rested in her lap, her eyes closed. She thought of the boy in the compound, the family on the road, the girl with the bundle of sticks, her wingman's voice cut off mid-sentence, the soldiers she had dragged out of the valley tonight. All of them. Her ghosts weren't gone, they never would be, but maybe that was the point. Maybe strength wasn't the absence of ghosts, maybe it was carrying them anyway. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in bruised gold and blood-red light, Raven opened her eyes. Her face was calm, her hands still trembled, but she was still here. Still standing. And as the horizon widened before them, a truth settled deep inside her. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks into the fire with steady eyes, carrying ghosts no one else can see. And dignity, true dignity, doesn't argue, doesn't demand, doesn't shout. It simply acts.